90% of the planet is already completely overrun by aliens, and soldiers are being urgently sent on deadly missions deep into the infected territories. In the near future, Earth is under attack by aliens, who have taken over most of the planet. The military is fighting back against the alien monsters and recruiting volunteers to push for an inevitable victory. A new infection zone has just been identified in the Middle East. It's home to massive tentacled creatures that move through the desert in small groups, wiping out entire cities in their path. Sergeant Frater is part of a special U.S. military unit operating at the heart of this infected zone. At first, humanity fought as one, but airstrikes and carpet bombings meant to wipe out the enemy caused civilian casualties. This has led to growing local resistance against the military. Despite the danger, Frater continues his mission, tasked with eliminating not only the monsters but also the rebels. When he returns to camp, even his own men don't recognize him due to his skilled use of camouflage, and only his papers keep him from being executed on sight. Michael, Frankie, Sean, and Carl are four best friends from Detroit. They've been in the military for a few years but have yet to face real danger. Eager to make some money and prove themselves, they agree to head to the front lines. Before leaving for the infected zone, each takes care of personal business. Michael, an orphan, has nothing to do, unlike the others. Frankie spends time with his wife and kids to say goodbye. Sean helps deliver a baby for his girlfriend and promises to return to them so they can be a family. The day before their deployment to the Middle East, the friends attend illegal fights where a pit bull battles an alien, which is executed after the dog wins. That night, they throw a farewell party, spending time with easygoing women. A few days later, the four friends from Detroit head to the Middle East to join the U.S. Special Forces in fighting the monsters. For the first time, they leave their small town and gaze at the landscape from the helicopter. They're awestruck by the massive, powerful alien creatures, which respond aggressively to the approaching helicopters. One of the monsters attempts to attack, but the pilot manages to avoid the collision. Moments later, air support arrives and launches a strike, wiping out an entire column of monsters that had been moving across the desert, searching for another city to destroy. Upon arriving at the secret base, the soldiers meet their superiors, including the fun-loving and unpredictable Sergeant Forrest, as well as the strict and duty-driven Sergeant Noah Frater. The four friends have to quickly adapt to their new, tougher environment. There's no room for weakness or cowardice here. They've joined an elite unit tasked with the most dangerous missions in the infected zones. On their day off, soldiers can unwind a bit by playing soccer, but even that turns into a serious challenge. Forrest tests their endurance and ability to handle stress, openly provoking them into conflict. He doesn't shy away from a fight because he wants soldiers who are bold and fearless on the battlefield. A few days later, the group heads out on their first patrol in two armored SUVs. Frater warns them about the dangers of the city, reminding them that rebels lurk among the locals and could strike at any moment. When they arrive, Michael, Frankie, and the others notice the hateful stares directed their way. They realize the hostility is due to the constant bombings and civilian casualties, even though they aren't responsible for it. The soldiers attract the attention of local kids and even pose for pictures with them. It seems like a beautiful place that still values freedom, peace, and life, but the people are suffering from the endless explosions, gunfire, and alien attacks. Trying not to let their emotions get in the way, the soldiers refocus on their patrol mission. Several hours later, they spot a group of suspicious individuals transporting containers filled with an unknown liquid. One of the soldiers guesses it might be water since the town has been struggling with a water shortage after the latest bombing. But Sergeant Frater is less optimistic. He suspects the containers could be filled with explosives being used by the rebels. At night, the group splits into two teams to scout the area and figure out what's in the containers. Nearby, several monsters are slowly approaching the house, so time for inspection is limited. Four soldiers storm the enemy's territory and come across an old man. The translator tries to communicate with him, but the man is hostile toward the Americans, blaming them for the many deaths, including women, the elderly, and children. He's not a rebel and has no weapons, but he also refuses to help the U.S. soldiers. Nervously reacting to the uninvited guests, the old man begins shouting, which draws the attention of nearby alien monsters. In an attempt to quiet him, Michael strikes the man in the face with the butt of his rifle. The monster gets closer, forcing the soldiers to open fire. Moments later, bombers arrive, striking from the air and eliminating the rest of the nearby monsters. Back at the base, Frater carefully debriefs the incident, harshly criticizing the soldiers for their lack of professionalism. They made a mistake by letting the old man get too close. Luckily, he was a civilian, but he could have been a suicide bomber, which would have wiped out half the squad. Later, Frater, visibly stressed, drinks to unwind and calls his wife. He wants to hear his daughter's voice, but his wife, distant and cold, ignores his requests. A few months later, Sergeant Frater informs the group that 4 soldiers disappeared in the heart of the infected zone just a few hours ago. Their mission is to infiltrate the enemy's lair, move carefully while defending themselves from both monsters and rebels, and find and rescue the missing group. Hours later, Frater leads the soldiers toward the evacuation point, located 12 kilometers from the quadrant where the 4 soldiers vanished. Upon arrival, the group of 8 transfers to 2 SUVs and heads deeper into the desert. At some point, they start getting chased by alien monsters, and the soldiers manage to take one of them down. Right after that, the first vehicle hits a planet explosive, killing 2 soldiers. The group is then surrounded by insurgents who open fire, trying to drive the outsiders off their land. Sean was in the first vehicle, manning the machine gun, which placed him higher up than the others, allowing him to survive. Though badly concussed, he stumbles towards the rest of the group but isn't paying attention to where he's going, steps on a mine, and loses both legs. While Sergeant Frater, Michael, and Frankie try to fend off the militants, picking them off one by one, Carl does everything he can to save Sean. He administers painkillers and uses tourniquets to stop the bleeding, but Sean is barely aware of what's happening. The insurgents are using every weapon they have, including RPGs, and they blow up the second SUV. The group loses another soldier and realizes they need to retreat, as they're in an open area and can't keep up a firefight with an enemy that vastly outnumbers them. Working together, covering each other with fire, the 5 remaining soldiers fall back to some abandoned buildings about 100 meters behind them. They manage to take cover in one of the houses, but the insurgents are still closing in. Frankie, overwhelmed by the situation, loses it and starts shooting the machine gun wildly. The sergeant tells him to conserve ammo, reminding him they're severely outnumbered and need to hold out until reinforcements arrive. Frater tries to contact the base to call for support, but the nearest evac isn't possible for another 27 minutes. They don't have that long, so he requests an airstrike drone be sent to their location. For the first time in such a tough situation, Michael and Frankie struggle to pull themselves together and calm down. The sergeant is forced to fight off the insurgents attacking from all sides while also snapping the soldiers back to reality. Carl is still trying to save Sean, but due to massive blood loss, Sean dies. Carl attempts chest compressions, but it's too late. The command center reports that a drone is ready for a carpet bombing run. The area they're in is swarming with monsters and insurgents, so they need to find cover, which is 200 meters away. Upon receiving news of the impending strike, Frater orders the team to split into pairs, covering each other as they retreat. Michael, Frankie, and Carl don't want to leave their friend's body behind, hoping to bury him, but survival comes first. The sergeant promises they'll come back for Sean to give him a proper send-off, but for now, they have to complete the mission. The 4 survivors fall back to a better position to wait for further evacuation orders. After clearing the building and finding no enemies, the soldiers take a moment to rest. They try to come to terms with the loss of their close friend. Just as it seems the danger has passed, a sniper takes out Carl with a precise shot. The soldiers barely have time to react and grab their weapons before another shot rings out, critically wounding Frankie. Frater wanted to return fire, but he knew it would be pointless. The sniper was too far away to hit quickly, and they were surrounded by dozens of insurgents. Their only chance of survival is to surrender, so the sergeant and his men drop their weapons and beg for mercy. Frater, Michael, and Frankie are taken to a base and tied to chairs. When the hoods are removed from their heads, the sergeant and Michael see that their wounded friend is sitting across from them, slowly bleeding out. Michael pleads for medical help, but the insurgent leader forces him to watch as his friend fades away. Frater tries to talk to Frankie and encourage him to hold on, but it's no use. Michael, overwhelmed by rage, tries to break free but ends up falling, hitting his head, and losing consciousness. At night, a massive monster attacks the insurgent base, causing most of the fighters to flee. One of the insurgents heads toward the hostages, planning to either execute them or leave them as food for the alien monster to buy some time for his escape. As soon as he unties Frater from the chair, the sergeant attacks the insurgent and crushes his skull. After cutting the remaining rope with shards of broken glass, Frater helps Michael regain consciousness and free himself. The sergeant goes off to scout the area while Michael stays close to Frankie's body to say goodbye to yet another friend. Tears well up in his eyes as he mourns the loss of 3 of his closest friends in just one day. A few minutes later, Michael finds a piece of pipe and sets off in search of the enemy. When he encounters the insurgent leader in the armory, he brutally avenges what happened to his friend. Michael takes all the weapons from the armory and bolts outside, where he sees the monster destroying high-voltage power lines. Meanwhile, the sergeant finishes searching the building and executes anyone who couldn't escape. After taking care of the enemies, Frater and Michael ride off on 2 motorcycles they took from the insurgents. In the morning, they stop as Michael begins to feel overwhelmed. He's nauseous, and the shock makes it hard for him to respond appropriately to everything happening around him. The sergeant supports the soldier who has lost 3 friends, reminding him that they need to complete their mission and save the 4 missing soldiers. The 2 survivors ride through the desert until they run out of gas. Continuing toward the point where the missing soldiers were last seen, they are forced to stop for the night. It's here that Frater learns that Michael is an orphan and that his only family were the friends he lost today. Unlike the soldier, the sergeant has a loving wife and a wonderful daughter, but he doesn't rush to return to them. Spending time with his loved ones had gradually distanced him, and he soon lost his emotional connection with them. His daughter began to fear him, leading Frater to decide that it was easier to fight to protect his family than to be near them. The next morning, they continue their journey and notice an injured monster unable to get up after the latest airstrike. Nearby, they spot a wrecked school bus, which Frater decides to search for food or water. Inside, they find a lot of bodies, which weighs heavily on the soldier and sergeant. They're used to such sights, but it's hard for them to look at the children who have no future anymore. At one point, Michael notices that one boy is still alive and trying to move. He picks him up and pulls him from the burning bus, trying to help the child. The boy has a severe abdominal injury, making it difficult for him to breathe and causing him intense pain. Realizing this, Frater decides to end the boy's suffering and attempts to strangle him. Michael stops him, knowing that such a decision is morally too heavy to bear. When Frater tries to relieve the boy's suffering again, the soldier takes the boy away from him. At the same time, they notice 3 riders, locals, including a woman. It turns out to be their school bus, and they can help the boy. After finding a water source on their way back, the soldiers clean themselves up, and the woman washes the child's wound to ease his suffering. Upon arriving at the local settlement, the soldiers approach the people with distrust and caution, but they realize they pose no threat. The children eagerly interact with them, play games, examine their weapons, and share their toys. In the evening, Frater and Michael have dinner with everyone, after which a few people head into the desert. Michael follows the woman and the men with her. It turns out they decided to return to the bus to perform a ritual and bury the children who didn't survive the bombing. Meanwhile, Frater finds the tent where the rescued boy lies. Despite the medical help and medicine he received, the little one stops breathing. This hits the sergeant hard, as he realizes he could have spared the boy from suffering but didn't act in time. Now, he's forced to watch as the child loses his life, racked with horrible pain. As a result, Frater not only loses control of his emotions but also literally begins to go insane, growing more and more deranged with each passing minute. Michael and the local woman linger near the destroyed bus, watching as a monster approaches. Instead of trying to flee or seek shelter, they decide to observe its actions. The alien creature mourns the monster that was harmed in the explosion, then releases a multitude of flying spores. This beautiful sight shocks Michael, as the aliens do not behave aggressively unless attacked. They live their lives and grieve the loss of loved ones just as deeply as humans do. In the morning, Michael returns to the settlement, only to be attacked by the sergeant. As he beats his subordinate, Frater reminds him of the importance of their mission. They must find and rescue the 4 missing soldiers so that the loss of 6 members of their group wasn't in vain. Frater is willing to do anything to locate the lost group, and he won't let Michael argue or express his opinions. Upon seeing the body of the child they pulled from the bus, the soldier decides to see this through to the end. Soon, he and the sergeant head to a neighboring village. On the way, they encounter a young boy raising a harmless monster and realize that not all aliens are dangerous to humans. A few hours later, they arrive in the neighboring village and see that it has suffered due to active fighting and bombings. Carefully examining each street, Michael notices children playing with an American soldier's rifle. After questioning them, Frater and Michael gather information about where their comrades are located. Upon finding the right house, they discover the bodies of 4 soldiers wrapped in shrouds. Realizing these are the ones they were searching for, Frater completely loses his grip on reality. He has dedicated himself to this mission, and now it has failed, meaning all his efforts were in vain. In his frustration, the sergeant furiously attacks the locals, trying to determine who among them killed the soldiers. Frater executes a local man in front of the child and threatens the others. Realizing that he's dangerous and won't stop, Michael shoots the sergeant in the back to save the child and his family. Wounded, Frater staggers into the street and, stripping off his extra gear, contemplates a single question: what am I doing here? As he heads toward the evacuation site, the sergeant bleeds out and collapses, slipping into eternal sleep. Michael watches as enormous monsters consume yet another city, wiping it off the face of the earth. At the same time, the helicopter arrives, and Michael has the chance to return home. The focus is on young soldiers whose lives have been shattered by war. How justified is the use of force and militarization if it destroys both the lives of the soldiers and those they are meant to protect? What long-term consequences can a culture of violence have on society itself when external threats serve as a backdrop for human cruelty? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.